The gravity of the time is such that every new avenue of peace, no matter how dimly discernible, should be explored. Never before in history has so much hope for so many people been gathered together in a single organization. You will provide a great share of the wisdom, of the courage, and the faith which can bring to this world lasting peace for all nations and happiness and well-being for all men.
Welcome to the Titans of Nuclear podcast. I'm Adam Smith, and we have a very special episode today. Today on the show, we have Joe McBrearty, the president and CEO of the Canadian Nuclear Laboratories. Joe, welcome to the show.
Great, thanks very much. I certainly appreciate the opportunity to join everyone today. I think this is a great opportunity for us at CNL to be able to tell the world a little bit about what Canadian Nuclear Laboratories, and in particular our campus at Chalk River, which is just north of Ottawa, what we do and how we interface with the nuclear world, and how we are working on technology and research and development to advance not only nuclear energy, nuclear science, but also radiopharmaceuticals to help combat disease.
Yep, you guys up in Chalk River kind of cover the whole spectrum of nuclear activities.
We do. I mean, there's a long, very storied history back all the way to the Second World War, starting around the mid-1940s. You know, Chalk River was the birthplace of the CANDU reactor, which is deployed not only within Canada, but internationally with just a great safety record, very reliable reactors. And between that and the production of radioisotopes to support radiodiagnostics or therapeutics in cancer and other health issues, it really has left a huge mark on the world. But sometimes sometimes we're not as well known as some of the other laboratories or nuclear entities that exist out there today. So hopefully being on the podcast today will help spread a little bit of that word. And I certainly appreciate the opportunity to join you.
Absolutely. Now, just for my benefit and the benefit of our audience, the Canadian Nuclear Laboratories is essentially the Canadian equivalent of the national laboratory system of the U.S., correct?
Correct. I mean, I think that's a really good way to put it. The U.S. national laboratory system is a bit more broad, but it's actually a very good comparison, because actually just a few years ago, the Canadian government actually decided to change the operating model to what had been what's known as a government-owned, government-operated laboratory, to what the U.S. National Laboratory system uses as a government-owned, contractor-operated. So we are actually a private company, a private joint venture that operates a federal entity. And part of that is designed to bring, business acumen, business practices, much more, say, financial and operational rigor to the laboratory system.
Yeah, you're focused on commercializing your research efforts or your research findings, essentially.
And that's a very good way to sum it up. We actually, because of the type of research that we have done throughout the years and what we are doing today, we actually operate more as a bridge. And so a lot of research that is done at universities and colleges is what we refer to generally as more basic science. It's more very low technology readiness level. It's more, advancing very new concepts. But we are kind of in the middle between those universities and the commercialization of products. So your point on trying to drive commercial success really is really a key part of our DNA, to be able to take academic ideas, something on the blackboard. And I know that's an old term for most people, but I still am old enough to remember blackboards.
It plays still. It works. We get it.
Yeah, it does. I think people would understand. They've seen an old black and white movie. And so to be able to take those theories and that very bench level testing to a bit more of a lab scale and a bit more of a pilot production capability before it goes to industry, because industry really wants to be able to see something that has been tested before they want to invest a lot of money into it.
Got it. Okay, that's very interesting for that, basically that structure where you're the bridge between the academic world and the commercial world, and you got to have your foot in basically both areas.
And you do, and it's I have a little bit of history with the U.S. National Laboratory complex, but it's the complex is very mature, and the ability to take stuff that is that ideas which are frankly very esoteric that people don't think are ever going to come to fruition, and be able to invest the time, the energy, the money to be able to show that they really will work in maybe not necessarily the first idea of what people had, but some sort of follow-on, revision of that idea to
Yeah,
actually get to a useful commercial product for industry.
interesting. Sounds like you've had quite the career path then. How can you give us a little bit about your background and kind of how you, I guess, your background, your career path, and how you ended up within the broader energy and nuclear space?
Sure, and I appreciate that question, because I think it's important for folks who are actually trying to get into the nuclear industry in particular, because it can be a little overwhelming or a little odd, because it's not always seen on the evening news or in sitcoms, and not
Very niche.
necessarily, if it is, it's not in a good way.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
I actually started off in the U.S. Navy as a nuclear submarine officer, and spent 30 years in the nuclear submarine program, all the way up through command of a submarine and a few other facilities. And then I went to the U.S. Department of Energy, where I was fortunate enough to be able to lead or be the chief operating officer for the DOE's Office of Science. And the Office of Science really drove 10 national laboratories in the United States for more basic research. But the experience that I was able to gain there really, I think, set the foundation for me, and to be able to translate that up to this laboratory, which is really undergoing a rebirth. As I said earlier, 70 years of just incredible history here, but it needed to be revitalized. It really needed a different focus, especially as we were looking at, the impacts of climate change, the real, impacts here over the last few years of energy security. Energy security has always been a big deal, but it hasn't come to the front edge of the market recently until what's occurred over the last couple of years in Europe and Central Asia. And so the ability to see how the nuclear program works, how it can be done in a reliable, a safe, and a very cost-effective manner, and then translate that into research, and then come here. Really, I felt I'll tell you, just very blessed to have that opportunity, and really the opportunity to work with simply outstanding people throughout my entire career. Because trust me, if it was not for them, I would probably not be here. So.
Yeah. Standing on the shoulders of giants is, I believe, the phrase that people use.
Correct. Yep. Absolutely. Absolutely. And then sometimes those folks just don't get the recognition and I guess the recognition that they deserve. And there are just tens of thousands of people working in this industry, and it's a safe industry. Yeah, there have been a couple major incidents, but when you break those down, there were very specific reasons for them. But what the nuclear industry in particular has learned, it has learned how to address issues in the past, learn from those, and be able to reflect advanced and more proactive measures to be safe, to be reliable, but also to be cost efficient.
Yeah. When you compare nuclear to all of the full spectrum of energy technologies, I think it has by far the best safety track record of all time. So, you know, I
Yes.
think you're absolutely right. The industry is not only just naturally careful, but it has learned to be increasingly careful and established all sorts of safety systems and passive safety systems. So if something does go wrong, we can step away from it for 72 hours and everything's fine.
Absolutely. And I think one of the things that hurt the nuclear industry very early on, and I'll say some of this is because it comes from a bunch of people in the US operating submarines in a very secretive, cloistered society. They never really felt like talking about what they do very much. And it was always a little hush hush. And we learned that was a bit of an Achilles heel for us when the 3 Mile Island incident occurred back in the 70s. And that probably most of the people listening to your podcast weren't born in the 70s. I was. And when you look at our ability over the last few years, it's really to be able to communicate. But we still have issues. I would say we're not still there yet that we can communicate as clearly and without pushback as some other clean renewable energy industries.
Yeah.
But when you look at, and I think you brought up a good point when you talk about safety, lessons learned, reliability. When you look at the different generations of nuclear technology, we'll just stick with reactors for this point, and how that's evolved to the latest crop of small modular reactors or advanced reactors, where safety is really at the core of, and pardon the pun there, yes, is really at the center of how we do business, because we have to be able to earn and keep the public's trust. We really do.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. Public perception is one of the hardest things to influence, but it's one of the most important factors with any project development. It's just you have to have everyone on board, and the better we can educate people, the easier that becomes for the industry.
Absolutely. And times have changed, right? So, back in the early advent of nuclear energy, the public was not as informed. And I would say that's, we have learned that is not the right way to do business.
Mm-hmm.
And here in particular in Canada, we have learned a lot of lessons with what has occurred with Indigenous communities and First Nations in the past. And that really is not a track record that the country should be happy with. I think it's getting better. But one of the things as an industry that we need to do, and I think we are doing it, is to be able to reach out and listen to what Indigenous communities and First Nations, what their concerns are, because many of the potential deployment possibilities for small modular reactors are in their territories.
Mm-hmm.
When you look particular, if you want to look at really an area that could really use autonomous power that is clean and not necessarily, always the best for solar or wind. When you look in the north, or when you look at isolated areas that need not only electricity, but heat, but potentially hydrogen production,
Yep.
kind of the whole 9 yards when it comes to energy production, but also energy security. It offers that whole package. But people have to want it, and you have to be able to have the conversation to understand what their concerns are. And I think that will remain, I think, one of the crucial areas where the nuclear industry, as most industries have to do, is to make sure people are educated about it, that they understand, but equally as important, that we listen to them. We understand what their needs are, what their concerns are, and why they have those concerns, and just not talk at them. The governments and industry have been very good for probably millennia talking at people because they want to sell something, vice actually listening to what people need and what they want.
Do you have some sort of, I guess I would call it like a dialogue program or a marketing program at CNL for those conversations?
We certainly do. So as a nuclear entity, and we haven't really talked about this very much, but the vast majority of our budget at CNL is actually for environmental remediation and cleanup.
Interesting.
So most people think of CNL as a laboratory, but we are a laboratory that is committed and has been tasked by the federal government to basically conduct the largest environmental cleanup in Canadian history. So it is the legacy work for that has the nuclear legacy and liabilities that exist not only here at Chalk River, but in some areas around Toronto in the Port Hope area, and in what we call the Northern Transportation Route, coming from the Northwest Territories all the way down to Toronto. We are the ones who are responsible for the decommissioning and the demolition of the federal reactors. So those are reactors here at our site. We have a site out in Manitoba called Whiteshell. And so to get to your question, do we have those conversations? Absolutely. And those conversations, especially when you're talking about how are you going to deal with nuclear, you can call them byproducts, you can call them whatever, it's basically nuclear waste at the end of the day. How do you take that and convince folks that there are legitimate and technically satisfactory ways to deal with it, and how do you convince them to do it in their area? And so those are all processes and parts of a very complex and I think very rigorous licensing process that we go through, that every nuclear entity in Canada goes through with a Canadian Nuclear Safety Commission. And so we are today in the process of going through multiple regulatory approvals for different either waste remediation or environmental remediation projects or future energy projects. So a lot of conversation. It is central and core not only to what our federal client AECL needs, but it's also central and core to us to make sure that we can actually do our mission, and we can do it in partnership with local communities, whether they're municipalities or whether they're indigenous.
Interesting. So that's just one part of the CNL business. There's also, from my understanding, there's the R&D on the energy generation side. There's the medical isotopes. Do you find that you have a particular draw to one of those sections or some sort of passion project that really excites you at CNL?
So they're multiple, and early in my career, I would have probably talked mostly about nuclear energy production. So in reality, the small modular reactors that we talk about today, even though we say that's all new technology and it's a new concept, that technology really has existed for 70 years. They've just been floating around on submarines and aircraft carriers and out of kind of people's minds. But the concept of autonomous power, I think, was really, for me, a key component of why I got interested in this and why I've continued it. But over the last few years, and this really, for me, started with some activities when I was in the U.S. Department of Energy, was really the radiopharmaceutical and radioisotope portion of the nuclear industry spectrum. And when you look at the possibilities of these new therapies for cancer, therapies for chronic disease, either what we call targeted beta therapy, which is they use a product called lutetium-177. Actually, I think Bruce Power is working on that. But there's another one called targeted alpha therapy, which we are working on. And it basically takes a molecule of actinium. Now, I really didn't know what actinium was for most of my life. And I got exposed to it. I mean, not exposed to it,
Not
but
literally.
got involved in the program when I was in the US. And the potential positive benefits of this treatment are enormous. And not only from the standpoint of where it could save people, but also from the standpoint of very little collateral damage to the patient. But there's a YouTube video out there. I think it's done by Triumph. It talks about the name of the video is the rarest drug or rarest isotope on Earth. And there's so little of this particular isotope to be able to be used for, in particular, cancer treatment. What we're looking at here is to be able to produce more of it, either through decay of some actinides or production via an accelerator path. So when I look at that, when you ask the question, what have I become passionate about? When I look at friends or family members who suffer and don't have a solution to that from a medical perspective. And we actually have that capability to provide it from our industry. We should jump on that. It should be in my, obviously I'll be a bit parochial here, but I think that should be near the top of the government's priority list in combating chronic disease. And if you have that capability, if you can, give folks, that chance of, a new chance at life, you should really be able to do that. And so for me, that really is kind of a passion. It's not an easy process. You have to get funding, you have to get through regulatory approvals, you actually have to have all the technology work. It's not something that you go out, pull something out of the drawer and it works and boom, you're good. It is a process, and it is I think a project which could revolutionize oncology. I really do, and I think for me, that's really, really important.
What would you say has been the biggest holdup? You kind of named a few, like the getting everything to work, getting the technology to work, the regulatory side. It seems like this has been around. This isn't new technology, is what it sounds like. Just sounds like hasn't been a lot of development of it. And
there has been in certain respects.
Yeah,
there has been. There are different methods to be able to produce it, but one of the issues is there's not much. Right, so the principal production path today is decay of, as I said, some actinides, which they are in very small quantities, and that's a limited production path. But the other more aggressive paths are actually radiation or irradiation of targets of certain targets to be able to produce actinium. But there are some concerns with that. Whenever you produce one thing, you always get a lot of other little guys floating around who you don't want. So you have to be able to not only produce something in specific quantities that are cost effective and actually are something that business or venture capitalists or banks or whomever want to invest in to provide that necessary financial uplift. So that's one issue. The second issue is being able to get any kind of new drug to the market. We are not a pharmaceutical company, so we are actually partnered with a pharmaceutical company to try to do some of that effort. But it is, trials of any new medication take a long time, and you have to not only. And it's timing of not having too much or not having enough. It's the right amount at the right time for folks to not only want to invest in it, but for the medical community to want to start to demand it. And once you can get through, the different phases of testing and prove that it works, because it takes years to be able to get to a product that is profitable. And I'll just say that because it's a business. For companies to be able to actually produce, and it has to be tested enough and then marketed enough that the medical community, whether they're physicians, whether it's hospitals, or whether it's large insurance companies, whatever it is, actually are interested in it and want to promote it and use it. And so the pharmaceutical industry is full of many things that were tried, never quite made it. And so there's significant monetary investment that's necessary for this. But we believe that this is we do believe that this is a game changer when it comes to saving lives. So that's why I think we're really important. I'm really excited about it. I'm not as concerned about the regulatory approvals because there are accelerators throughout the country, and we have a very it's a relationship with CNSC where we provide our projects and they assess them. They provide what the regulatory environment has to be able to do things safely. And so I would say it's a healthy tension always between industry and the regulator, because you can't be too close to the regulator, because then people go, well, are they actually doing the right thing? But you also can't have complete what's the word? You can't be completely at opposite ends of the spectrum. Their job is to make sure we do something. If you do it right, you do it safely. You're not going to endanger the public. You're not going to endanger the environment. And that's where they're always going to come from.
Got it. So yeah, it sounds like you have a couple different issues from the medical isotope production side of things. Is actinium the only medical isotope you guys are looking at, or are there others out there?
Actinium is the only one that we are looking at this point in time. But as I mentioned, lutetium-177 is also being produced in the Canadian Nuclear Complex, which is, as I said, it's a targeted beta emitter. And it's a little bit different than the targeted alpha, but the effect is similar. So there are different organizations looking at different things, but the actinium one, we believe at this point in time is key. That said, as a research laboratory, we are always looking for the next, in that case, the next radioisotope that we could use. We have our own biological research facility where we can do limited trials on animals. So we have some capabilities to actually look at the effects of radiation, the effects of these different isotopes on living things.
Interesting. It sounds like you guys have quite a bit going on up there at Chalk River.
There's a fair amount. It does keep us busy on a daily basis. Yes.
So I guess where you guys are so busy, you guys must be forward looking a little bit. What is happening at Chalk River, and could you talk a little bit about the Vision 2030 plan?
Sure. And thanks for bringing that up. So we're in the middle of, for us, a 10-year contract. And we're about at the midpoint, and the vast majority of the first portion of the contract was really focused on environmental remediation. And that program will continue probably for 60 or 70 years, because there's so much that has to be cleaned up. But we began to think, okay, how do we, working with the federal government and trying to think what are the needs of the nation, how do we focus what we can do to better the country, and where are the key areas that Canada and frankly the rest of the world want to focus on? And so we came and how can we as influence? We're not going to be doing some types of research that other laboratories are going to do, but what's kind of in our bailiwick to be able to perform? And so we stepped back and looked at it and we said, okay, climate change, kind of a big thing for people. It does make a little bit of news. How do we as a nuclear laboratory fit into that? Well, I think obviously we fit in pretty well, because we support all of the CANDU technologies. We support light water reactor work, which is a boiling water or pressurized water reactor. But we also have a program supporting new small modular reactors. So in concert with a company called Global First Power, which is a JV between OPG and Ultrasafe Nuclear Corporation, or USNC, we are working with them to site the first microreactor on a campus here at Chalk River. So that process is already underway. Global First Power is working closely with providing license input and EIS input into the CNSC to be able to get a license, and at the same time working through technical challenges with us. We, on the other hand, what we're doing is we provide services and we're really, at the end of the day, we're a material chemistry laboratory. We're a materials laboratory. We happen to do a lot in the nuclear world, but we're really a materials laboratory. And so we provide technical support, analysis, whether it's fresh fuel or materials or irradiated fuel or materials. We provide that type of service to the entire industry, not only the CANDU industry that's operating today, but also to the new SMR vendors, whether it's high temperature gas, boiling water, pressurized water, molten salt, whole 9 yards. So we do that through really a cost sharing program. A couple of the other areas which I think are really important are gaining traction even more within the Canadian ecosphere is hydrogen. So CNL has always had a very strong hydrogen program, not only from the potential for hydrogen production, but more importantly now the hydrogen safety. So as nations, want to go to hydrogen as a fuel source, hydrogen doesn't behave like gasoline. It doesn't even behave completely truly like natural gas. It has different chemical properties, and it has to be handled a little bit differently. You have to figure out what's the best method to transport it, what's the best method to store it. So we actually have a very a strong hydrogen program tied to the government and tied to industry to be able to support that. Secondly, we also have some of the very limited expertise in the world on tritium management. So tritium, heavy isotope of hydrogen, is in many cases has been used in heavy water reactors. The water gets tritiated, but tritium for most fusion reactors for the future require deuterium, and they require tritium in some form or fashion. And the ability to handle it, manage it, safely do it, to have the safe radiological engineering is something that we have as a piece of expertise. So the other thing that we are doing here is the development of what we call Clean Energy Research Initiative and Development Initiative. And so that's starting for us today in the laboratory in really bench testing. But eventually what we intend to do is be able to take that out into a demonstration park where it will show how in a microgrid, a nuclear reactor, small modular reactor, hydrogen, wind, and solar all work together. So they can actually show in this little microgrid, not only for energy production for electricity, but also kind of the autonomous power sources that you would really like to be able to deploy into the north or into a remote area. So the real advantage kind of this national laboratory concept, if you want to get into this, is the ability to test and to demonstrate. We're not necessarily looking to make a profit off a demonstration reactor, but if you want to actually be able to convince folks where you want to put one of these things, that it's safe, that it operates, that it can do all the wampadine things that you claim it can do, and it can do it safely, then you really need to be able to demonstrate it. You really need to be able to test it. And that's what a national laboratory kind of brings to the equation.
Earlier you had mentioned that most of this technology has been operating in submarines since the 70s essentially, or even before that probably.
50s. Let's go back to the 50s.
Yeah, since the 50s. What testing or what additional analysis do we need? It feels like 70 years to try this technology out should be sufficient operating history.
So the reactors are a bit different. So I think and I'll just leave it at that because the Navy is very, very touchy about descriptions of its power sources. But even the technologies that most of the technologies that are being researched today, the technology itself is not brand new. So high temperature gas reactors have been around for a long time. Boiling water reactors around for a long time. But some of the stuff that's new are the materials that you're using, or the types of fuel that you're using today. You're using you have the potential to use TRISO fuel. You have the potential to use high assay, low enriched uranium, or LEU plus. So the fuels will be different. To be able to ensure that the fuels and the materials will react and act, safely under these new conditions is really pretty important to be able to do. The technology exists. The theory is there. These have generally been done on a much larger scale. They're large scale high temperature reactors. They're large scale PWRs and BWRs. But we're using probably different types of materials, some different types of materials They're smaller. They're designed to be, basically for the most part, I won't say completely portable, but easy to build, built in a factory and placed. So all of that type of stuff requires some sort of study. It requires some sort of demonstration. And most reactors today, I won't say all of them, but most reactors have not really acted as their own autonomous little grid, right?
Yep.
And operating on a warship is a little bit different than operating on land, where you have the populace right next to you. So there is really you have to be able to demonstrate to the regulator and to demonstrate to the communities and the folks that you want to, as I said earlier, deploy these machines to, that they are safe. And so while the technology may not be brand new, it's still different enough in some of these cases that it's smaller and it should be tested.
That makes sense. That makes sense. I get it. It's probably a little bit different when you're out at sea and you have a continuous cooling source rather than setting it on the ground somewhere in rural Canada. So
Well, it is different, and then like I said, the uses are different. To be able to play on a grid is a bit different, and to play with other I would say more transitory or less stable energy sources, solar, wind, etc. You want to make sure that you have kind of, I would say, almost a package deal, that you could say this reactor, this solar, this wind, all worked well together. You can produce hydrogen from it, you produce heat, electricity, and it works, and it's economical. Because at some point, if the process is not economical, the proponents are not going to continue to go down the path, right? So you have to be able to help the proponents get to the most cost-effective design, which is safe.
Yep. It's all about, at the end of the day, it comes down to, can we do this economically, and will someone invest in this? And that's really
Correct.
what will expand the industry. So
Yep.
it's exciting times with all these different technologies and ideas coming out into the industry. So
But it is. I mean, I've gone through several nuclear renaissances, or almost renaissances, and you get to a certain point, then something happens. Whether it was TMI or Chernobyl or Fukushima, the faith in the industry goes away, or very cheap natural gas. There was no need. I think you actually are at this kind of tipping point from a climate standpoint, but also from an energy security standpoint, that people are looking at options. And reactors have traditionally been associated with just producing electricity. Well, if you actually want to reduce greenhouse gases and all that kind of stuff, a large percentage of the stuff that you have to decarbonize is process heat. And so you need to be able to have something that will be able to safely handle, from a reactor physics standpoint and reactor operation standpoint, something with changing heat loads.
yep. Well, we can produce electricity. We can produce heat to heat your homes in the winter. We can cure cancer with it. It's an all-around just amazing technology. So
It is, and just to not close on a practical note or a pragmatic note, folks do worry about, what do you do with the byproducts? And it's always been a bit, as I said earlier, a bit of an Achilles heel for the industry to talk about this, because they're there, right? They are there. Now, there's some theories to reprocess, and you can get rid of some of that, but the amount of other types of waste are still there. The story really is, there isn't that much when you compare it to the other energy sources. The other part of that story is, we know exactly where it is. It's safe. It is highly engineered. We are highly regulated. And sometimes, I don't want to say we're our own worst enemy sometimes, but we are so safe about these things. We're so open about, issues that can occur. People don't understand the context.
Yep.
But when you look at how stuff is stored or disposed of in this particular industry, nobody can touch us in all this. Nobody can. And I think it's a testament to it's a testament to the engineering design, the rigor, and just the basic principles that this industry follows.
Well, to wrap things up, Joe, I wanted to see if you had any sort of message that you wanted to share with our listeners or the broader energy community, just on your thoughts on nuclear and our prospects.
Sure. I mean, I think it's bright. I really do. I think nuclear will continue to advance throughout the world. I think developing countries will look at this power source once it's cost effective. I mean, you can't just throw something out there and say pay all the startup costs. That this is a autonomous, it's a clean, it's a reliable, stable base power. It can be used in concert with wind, solar, natural gas, whole 9 yards. And what I would, when I sit back and look at it, I really do think that nuclear, this is our time. I do think that we can advance it. At the end of the day, though, the one thing that as an operator, and I've been an operator for really my entire life, you got to do it safely. And so sometimes in all the thrill and the sales of we're going to do this, we're going to save this, we're going to do all these things, we forget about the tens of thousands of people who are day in and day out operating these plants and these sites.
Mm-hmm.
And it comes down to those folks who do it on a day in and day out basis to make sure it's done safely, because the reputation of the industry really comes down to the individual. And so my message to folks is this is an industry that's rigorous. The training that folks go through from day one in anything in the nuclear industry is really not comparable to many other things. And when you look at the rigor that's in there and the consequence, it's high consequence stuff. We know that, but it's also incredibly important that we do things the right way. And we have done it. And sometimes, the 70 years of history is lost on folks that it's been done safely.
Joe, thank you for coming on the show. This has been great.
Thank you very much. I certainly appreciate it. Thank you for the time. And certainly if your listeners have any questions, they can contact our public affairs folks or visit our website. We'd love to continue the conversations.
And I would highly encourage everyone to do so. I went through it earlier, and they have quite a bit of great information on some of the topics that we just discussed.
And initiate at least a new approach to the many difficult problems that must be solved in both private and public conversation if the world is to shake off the inertia imposed by fear and is to make positive progress toward peace.